business. These things we ask in your name. Amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mrs. Presser, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Waddington?
Here.
Ms. Twine?
Here.
Mr. Lockhart?
Here.
Mr. Murray?
Here.
Ms. Lloyd? Here. Mr. Poole?
Present.
Mr. Brady?
Here.
Commissioners, we're going to go a little bit out of order tonight. We have two very special guests with us tonight. One visitor who we've seen before our State Representative Steve Arndt, and our newly minted State Senator, Teresa Gavarone. And I don't know if you're going to introduce her, but I know that the Senator is in town today for a reception at 5:30 that a couple of different organizations are hosting for, and so we're very grateful for her coming to our community and introduce herself. We had a very long and productive, fruitful, really wonderful relationship with your predecessor, and we look forward to continuing the same with you. We obviously will still be here when your event tonight finishes, but appreciated your accepting the invitation to stop by and say hello and introduce yourself. So the podium is yours if you'd like to address the commission and the folks back home.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity and the invitation to come out and introduce myself today. As a state representative, which was my previous position, I found it really important to get out in the community as much as possible, and I certainly want to continue that. And I know I have very big shoes to fill with Randy Gardner. He did a great job, and I'm looking forward to continuing that relationship with you. I actually come from a city background. I was a city council member in Bowling Green before I went down to Columbus to work in the House, and certainly appreciate everything that the local government does for the citizens. And thank you for the opportunity. I've just a little something about me. I've been an attorney since 1994. I've been married for 26 years and have 3 kids in college right now, one at Baldwin Wallace and one at University of Michigan and one down at Bowling Green. And we also have a business. And my husband started at Philadelphia Cheesesteak Shop in Bowling Green back when he was a college student. Mr. Spots, if anyone's been to Bowling Green. It's been open, just had its 33rd anniversary on Sunday. And so I served in the House from 2016 until February 6th when I was sworn in as the state senator. So I'm looking forward to working with you. I want you to know you can reach out to me anytime. If you have any issues, I want to hear from you. And I'm looking forward to getting out here a lot more often. I think this may be my 6th visit out this way. And since February 6th, I've been trying to get out in the community as much as possible. So I certainly will continue to do that. And I think this is just a wonderful district. I was so surprised when I came here and I saw Cedar Point. I had to get out of my car and I took pictures. This is just the best district ever, and I'm really looking forward to serving you.
Well, Senator Gardner always said that the Sandusky was his favorite part of the district. It will be yours as well, but we won't tell that to the folks back home. And we've had a wonderful relationship with Representative Art since he's taken his position, and we look forward to the partnership that we know the two of you will develop in representing our area. And I do have something for you if you'd like to come forward. Just a little token.
Thank you so much.
It's a pin and something unique and special to Sandusky.
Oh, I got
So,
a special Sandusky. You know, I was
you do.
admiring all your pins.
It's actually just an endless series of wrapper. That, I got something, a Russian tea doll.
Oh, this is great. Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Waddington.
when I got introduced tonight, I thought she was a new secretary for us when she came up. So I have to apologize. No, I didn't know.
Okay.
No.
Stop talking.
It was so nice meeting you.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for coming.
So nice.
Or you can take
I'm
that.
wearing that.
Okay, thanks for stopping by.
She's got one in Michigan.
How's that gonna work? I don't think.
There's a black sheep in every
Oh,
family.
would you mind stepping forward? Our photographer in chief would like to take, our secondary photographer in chief would like us to take a picture with you.
Oh, look at that.
Either way.
Just watch the wire, please.
Steve,
You should go
Steve,
too.
go. Get in there, yeah.
This is, right here is just fine.
Yeah,
I'm buying that.
There's a reason we put Commissioner Brady at the end.
This is perfect, isn't it?
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again. And never hesitate.
Commissioners, you have before you the minutes of our meeting of February 11, 2019. What is your pleasure?
Mr. Chairman,
Waddington.
I'm going to accept the minutes of the February 11th meeting and dispense with the formal reading.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion? Without objection, the motion be approved. Hearing no objection, the motion is approved. We turn to audience participation. Anyone wishing to address any of the regular items of business on our agenda, please step to the microphone, give us your name, address, and share with us your concerns or questions.
Hi, Mike Zulhoff. I chair your Planning Commission. I'm here to talk about the legislation to amend the landmark ordinance. And I encourage you to pass that legislation. I don't think there's anything earth-shaking there, but essentially it's been discussed by both my commission and the Planning Commission. And what it'll do is kind of reduce some barriers to making progress in rehabbing buildings downtown by allowing the staff to approve some minor alterations to buildings without actually having a hearing at the Landmark Commission. It also cleans up some language and also clarifies some issues to make sure it honors the original intent of the legislation. So I think it's really just basically a minor improvement to the process. It does not, but it does allows the Landmark Commission to delegate some authority to the staff to speed things up a little bit. So I'd encourage you to vote in favor of those changes. And I think you're going to hear a lot more about it from Mr. Horstman. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Zuloff. Thank you, Mr. Zuloff. Anyone else wishing to address the commission?
Sharon Johnson, 1139 Fifth Street. I would like to make a comment on the $500,000 grant that's going to one of the developers downtown. A few months ago, I read where the developer was taking this money for construction, but then he was going to use it for subsidies, rent subsidies. And he was going to take $50,000 of that $500,000 to put it in his nonprofit. I'm a little concerned about this, what I'm reading, and I was wondering, as a taxpayer, what guarantee do I have that this money is properly going to be spent properly? How are we going to monitor this to make sure that he does not put it in his nonprofit? Because it looks like there's a broad stroke on this agreement where there's no do's or don'ts or anything like that. And just upon him opening up his storefront, he gets this cash on the barrel. Usually when you accept a federal or state grant or a CDBG grant, they want to know what you spent the money on, and they want the money monitored. It looks like we're just going to just hand it over to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Anyone else wishing to address the commission? If not, then We will turn to a public hearing. As Mr. Zuloff highlighted, Mr. Horstman is here to walk us through the proposed amendments to Chapter 1161 regarding landmark preservation. This is a public hearing, so that's now open, and if you would make your presentation, Mr. Horstman, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the commission. My name is Tom Horstman from the Planning Department, and I will just briefly go over the changes that we are proposing to the amendment. Just as some background, the landmark ordinance was passed in 2015, and over the past year, there have been 10 applications approved by the Landmark Commission. What this does is any changes, exterior changes made to historic designated buildings or buildings in historic districts need to be approved by the Landmark Commission. And it also created a process by which the local commission here can designate buildings locally in addition to what's on the National Register of Historic Places. We have over 100 of those such buildings and districts in the city of Sandusky. So whether they're locally designated by this commission or nationally designated by the National Register of Historic Places, they fall under the purview of the Landmark Commission and this ordinance. So as the chairman of the Planning Commission just stated, there are a number of changes that we had proposed, and both of these were adopted or suggested for adoption by both the Landmark Commission and Planning Commission back in December. First is allowing the Landmark Commission to delegate to staff the ability to review minor changes and grant certificates of appropriateness on their own. We also did add additional criteria for granting certificates of appropriateness. I'll go into those in more detail in a moment. Adding some language to the minimum maintenance section, and then just general clarifying of language, making sure everything was in line with the intent of the original legislation if it was not there previously. So essentially, under 116107, the Landmark Commission may delegate to the planning department staff to review minor things that may not warrant a full meeting of the Landmark Commission. And if staff does make administrative certificates of appropriateness or grant certificates of appropriateness, then they must communicate that to the Landmark Commission at the subsequent hearing. If the applicant wants to appeal the planning department's decision, then they can appeal the decision to the Landmark Commission. So just essentially allowing us to speed up the process for very small things that may be on a historically designated property. The second part is adding criteria for certificates of appropriateness for all changes made. What we did was we just added language from the standards of the U.S. Department of the Interior, and those are listed in the full ordinance, but various things that are standard and that we've been doing anyway, we just wanted to put into our code. The things that are a little bit new is what we added. If an applicant wants to demolish a structure or a site within a district, there are a few things that we are going to require that applicant to have within their application. So like a report about the soundness of the building, valuation of the property, preliminary development plans, estimates of costs, things of that nature. And then the second part of this section includes criteria by which the Landmark Commission should judge this application for demolition. So looking at the significance, the viability of the building, and there's also in point number 6 is if demolition is necessary due to an imminent safety hazard, that was included just in case if that needed to happen. The city's building department or fire department could make that determination. And under the minimum maintenance requirements, there was a suggestion from the Landmark Commission and Planning Commission to further make sure that these historic buildings are being cared for appropriately. So just reiterating that these buildings must follow the city codes that we have, and that the Landmark Commission, can take it upon themselves to bring up any issues that they see with one of our designated buildings or sites. And finally, again, just some minor language changes to make sure everything was consistent throughout the ordinance with our other ordinances. You'll notice a distinction between historic and landmark in the ordinance. The significance of that is historic is defined if it's on the National Register, whereas landmark is defined if it's a locally designated landmark property. So we just wanted to make sure there was consistency within that. So that's a brief summary of all the changes that were proposed for the legislation. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Horstman. Commissioners, questions, comments? Mr. Horstman, would you just confirm for us so that we don't have any confusion on this? I think we went over this in 2014 or 15 when the legislation was originally adopted. But this is not something where the Landmark Commission roves about the city looking for buildings to designate as historic. This is something that we do only in cooperation with and at the request of the property owner, correct?
That's correct, Mr. President.
I want to make sure folks weren't concerned about that. And that was an important part of our decision and discussion when we adopted the legislation those a couple of years ago. This is a public hearing, and anyone wishing to speak to this legislation may step to the podium and offer any thoughts or comments or questions that they have about the proposed changes to the legislation. And seeing no one stepping, Mr. Zuloff, did you have something to add?
An additional point, the value to this legislation, and one of the reasons we did this was if someone wants to apply for Ohio historic tax credits, which can be substantial, I think 40% of the improvements. Well, normally it would be required that it be on the National Register of Historic Places, the building. Well, okay, that takes a long time. So this, if we name a local landmark, it would qualify under Ohio law for those tax credits. It wouldn't qualify for the 20% federal tax credits. So this is really important stuff. And of course, we need strong standards. We can't just name landmarks willy-nilly. To keep our credibility with the State Historic Preservation Office, we need to make sure that we're doing it right. So that's an important point. Is this stuff lets people apply for those very important historic tax credits in a more expedient manner. So it's another reason for going ahead with this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for pointing it out, Mr. Zuloff. I don't know how many millions or tens of millions of dollars of investment we've tracked, including the tax credits themselves and additional private investments, but it's been a huge boon to the city, and that is the reason, of course, that owners want to approach the Landmark Commission about designation. Additional comments or questions, or anyone else wishing to speak?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Poole.
I have two things. With regard to this delegation, this is something that Mr. Zuloff can either say he can take care of it or not. With regard to the delegation that you're doing to the staff, when you administratively make this delegation, include in there that whatever it's done, someone, if it can be the chairman of the commission, reviews this before it's actually finalized. You understand what I'm saying? The concept, once it's done, the Landmark Commission is who we've appointed to make this right for the community. Delegating what is easy for you to make your lives easier is fine, but the responsibility is still yours. And the process gets really befuddled when they've already told someone they can do something that no one on the Landmark Commission has at least reviewed before we tell them that they can do it. And
that's a very important point.
If you'd write in your procedure that they have to, chairman has to look at it or some way before it becomes official, because it never gets changed I've been on these commissions, it won't get changed.
Right.
We'll just have to live
And I
with it,
appreciate
with
that
the
concern, and we certainly gave that a lot of thought. So this legislation doesn't automatically do that. It allows the commission to delegate. It also allows, it explicitly allows the commission to rescind that. It also explicitly requires the staff to report back to anything they have approved administratively. So I can't speak for other commissioners. I will be watching very closely what they're doing, and I won't hesitate if I don't think that it's going properly. But the balance, that's the risk. The advantage to that process of allowing minor, and it does say minor alterations. The advantage, of course, is to to reduce exasperating barriers to progress. So with full appreciation for those concerns, and I tend to weigh where you do, with some skepticism and concerns about people doing things they shouldn't. I think on balance, I think it's a good compromise with adequate safeguards. We have to see how it goes. I think it'll work. I think that, if it doesn't, we will, the Landmark Commission will need to rescind that authority. So, thank you.
Further comments, commissioners? Anyone else wishing to speak? Ms. Horstman.
Mr. President, I apologize. I wanted to add one more bit. We did submit this proposal to the State Historic Preservation Office, just to make sure this was in line with their programs and such, with us being a local authority, and they did, approve themselves of all these changes that we made. So I just wanted to note that this was run by the state before we brought this to the commissions. So
Thank you for adding that.
Mr.
Anyone
Chairman,
else? Mr. Poole?
Just a question. What are the two landmark buildings in the community? Just don't know what they are.
through Mr. President, the two buildings that are part of the City Hall project. The names escape me off the top of my head.
Okay, I know which ones you mean, that's
yes.
fine. Do we have a list somewhere that people can see of all this that's under this? Is there a list
Through you,
somewhere?
Mr. President, yes, we do. We're working on publishing that online. We have it compiled, and we're working to make it more available. But yes, we do maintain a list of all these that we can easily provide.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the staff did, Mr. Horstman was probably referring to the list they've already begun. They've actually submitted a list to the Landmark Commission, and I'm sure they'll be reviewing it and updating it, and so that's available now. And by the way, that's required in the legislation.
I did see a GIS map that he published during his presentation location, so I'm sure that'll be made public at some point in time. Additional questions or comments? If not, then this hearing is closed. Commissioners, we have a number of pieces of legislation that have been recommended to us. I wonder if someone would care to make a motion to accept those communications.
So moved.
Second.
Then a motion and second discussion. Without objection, the motion be approved. Hearing no objection, the motion is approved. Commissioners, we have a number of items on our consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda presently that you would like to move to the regular agenda? If not, then Mrs. Crusher, would you present the consent agenda, please?
Yes, Mr. Murray. The first item, item A, is for disposal of vehicles from the Sandusky Police Department. Item B is a partnership agreement with Erie County, the City of Huron, and the City of Vermillion for the 2019 CHIP funding from the Ohio Development Services Agency. Item C is a priority use agreement with the Sandusky Travelers Baseball Academy for Rather Field. Item D is a priority use agreement with Sandusky Men's Softball League for Kiwanis Park. Item E is a priority use agreement with Sandusky Ambets Baseball League for Erie Blacktop Field and Concession Stand. Item F is a priority use agreement with Sandusky Central Catholic Schools. And item G is a priority use agreement with Sandusky City Schools for Dorn Community Park.
Thank you, Mrs. Crusher. Commissioners, consent agenda, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Lloyd?
I move that we accept the consent agenda and declaring all ordinances A through G as drafted and presented to the City Commission under the consent agenda shall take effect in accordance with Section 14 of the City Charter.
Second.
There's a motion and second. Discussion. Mrs. Crusher, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Now on the ordinances?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray? Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Those ordinances are adopted. Item number 1, please, Mrs. Crusher.
Yes, item number 1 is the first reading of an ordinance amending Part 11 Planning and Zoning Code, Title 5 Additional Zoning Requirements, Chapter 1161 Landmark Preservation of the Codified Ordinances of the City of Sandusky in the manner and way specifically set forth herein below.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Twine?
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the first reading.
Second.
Then a motion and second. Discussion. Mrs.
Mr. Chairman,
Crusher.
Mr. Chairman.
Poole.
Is there a planning commission meeting between now and the next time we meet?
I generally meet once a month, and
This Wednesday, but there's not a, I don't think there was anything on the agenda.
Okay, and this is first reading?
yes,
Okay, cool, thank you.
okay. Any other questions? Comments? Mr. Presser, would you poll the commissioners on the ordinance, please?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes,
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
that ordinance passes on first reading. Item number 2, please.
Item number 2 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into an enterprise zone agreement with the Cook Building LLC and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Waddington.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of rules in full accordance with section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion. Mrs. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
And on the ordinance?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 3, please.
Item number 3 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into an enterprise zone agreement with Huntley Building LLC and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Chairman,
Ms. Twine.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules in full accordance with section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion. Mrs. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
That ordinance is adopted. Item number 4, please.
Item number 4 is an ordinance authorizing and approving a grant in the amount of $500,000 through the Substantial Development and Grant Program to Cook Building LLC and Huntley Building LLC in relation to the properties located at 154 to 162 Columbus Avenue, 119 East Market Street, 133 East Market Street, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Waddington.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under suspension of rules in full accordance with section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
It's been a motion and second. Discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Lockhart.
this is a lot of money to give to the Cook Building. And in that, I'm supportive of Mr. Hoggerty and his wife and doing what they're doing because it's amazing, really, that they've taken a personal interest to make an investment here. However, the one thing that I look at is the lunchbox, which is what I've said before. The lunchbox, like most businesses, start out as a small business. Most big businesses are small before they get big. And the lunchbox has been in our community for about 30 years, give or take. And it's been a staple just as much as the State Theater and some of the other businesses. In fact, it was a draw downtown when we didn't have a draw. And because of what's happening now, I'm wondering what we've done to facilitate helping the lunchbox to move. That's my question to the staff in regards to this money. I mean, I have no problem, facilitating a potential development or construction. But I'd also like to know what we're helping when the lunchbox gets displaced with this. So if anybody can kind of.
Your specific question is what's happening with the lunchbox to help them?
Correct.
Okay. Is there anyone present? Mr. Wilson, please.
Through the commission president to Commissioner Lockhart, I spoke on the phone maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago with the proprietor of the lunchbox, and she had at that point secured a location that she was looking to negotiate a lease for the facility. And Matt, I don't know if you've heard from her, but I gave her Matt's contact information about city grants, and she said she would get back to us at the appropriate time, but we had a really nice conversation. And just to speak to the larger issue of the question, And I don't know if either Mr. or Mrs. Salmon want to address this at some point, but they are here to represent Rick and Megan, who couldn't make it tonight. But they did work closely with the Lunchbox to try to find terms, and a lot of it was, I don't want to get into the details of why they weren't able to come together, but it wasn't as if they told them either pay this really high rent or you're out of here. They tried to find interim strategies to make it work, and it didn't work out. But they have worked with a variety of local businesses who are also, potential lunchboxes of the future or existing businesses to try to give them rehab space. And just to answer Sharon's question, while we have the floor, this grant is not for the grant program. What Rick and Megan said is that this grant made it possible for them to do some additional things that will allow them to help tenants with rent breaks or alternatively to give money to their foundation. But it is absolutely tied to the construction of this building. And I don't know if Matt wants to speak to that, but this is a really difficult to rehab property, and without this grant, it would be really difficult to make those numbers cash flow. But everything in our grant ties this grant to the construction or the reconstruction of the rehabilitated buildings and has nothing to do with the small business program that the Hografys have done. What they said was they could not have done that program but for having received this and other assistance on the project. I don't know if you want to add to that, Matt.
I'll just add through you, Mr. President, in part to Commissioner Lockhart's question. Eric's correct that the proprietor of the Lunchbox believes they've located a space, and then we're awaiting an ED application, which I have not received, but we believe they're going to make a request for assistance through the ED committee and potentially based on the level of that grant through this commission to assist with kitchen and build out of the restaurant space. As relates to the second piece, as is the case with all of our ED grants, we exclusively tie it to construction, which is the case here, which ties it to construction costs and receipt of certificates of occupancy. And as with all of our grant applicants, whether it's a grant that comes to commission or is small enough to not go to commission, folks before reimbursement have to not only provide certificate of occupancy, but also have to provide evidence of costs incurred and insurances that all mechanics liens are expunged in essence, and there's no outstanding obligations to any contractors on any job. So that are the requirements through this grant, which are through all of our grants, regardless of size, that come before this commission or do not go before the commission.
Thank you, gentlemen. Additional questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman,
Cool.
just to say that I want to echo my support dealing with the Lunchbox, with the amount of money that we're spending on development in this community. The Lunchbox has been, as he said, a staple in downtown. They were there when no one else wanted to be there, and we must do whatever we can to ensure that business continues. Downtown should have a place to eat breakfast.
Additional questions or comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Lockhart.
Just so that we're clear, it's I support anyone that wants to do some development downtown, but, when we give substantial assistance to one, we should give substantial assistance to the ones that have been here, that kind of paved the way and paid the taxes to where we are now, so that the ones that come beyond us or after us, they get to benefit from that certainly, but we want to take care of the ones that have been here. And so that's what I'm looking at. I want to make sure that going forward, that there's substantial assistance to the Lunchbox as well. So if that's what the staff is saying now, then certainly I'd like to hear back from you in the future on that.
Sure. Well, without slighting any other restaurants in town or the area, the Lunchbox had by far and away the best breakfast potatoes I've ever had, and I do miss them. And I would welcome their return to the downtown area because they were quite good, and they had a number of lovely people who had worked there for many, many years. I do want to talk a little bit about the larger context of this grant and why I think it makes economic sense. We live in a community that has legacy assets and legacy liabilities. And the Cook Building is a huge legacy liability in that sense, in the sense that if it had to be torn down, we would spend about the same amount of money or maybe more than we're proposing to add to the $8.5 to $10.5 million that the Hografys are going to be investing in this property just to tear it down, and then we wouldn't have a rehabilitated building. If you think about the money that we spent, it's about exactly the same amount of money, maybe it was even a little bit more than we spent to tear down the Keller. And we didn't have anything to show for that when we were finished. We sold the property for $70,000 or so, but this is, I think, a smart investment for us, because if we don't, I'm not going to pick on any local communities, But there are communities who have hollowed out downtowns, and that is their economic center. We're not talking about downtown as some kind of hallowed ground. What downtown is our business center. It's where most of our taxes, or a disproportionate amount of our taxes and commercial activity occurs. And so I think for that reason, it makes sense to make this investment so that the state of our buildings downtown doesn't slip to the point where we're looking at just liabilities and not having businesses and people in there who are spending taxes and making investments in our community. So for all of these reasons, I support this legislation. Additional questions or comments? Mrs. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
And now on the resolution?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
That resolution is adopted. Item number 6.
Five.
Yes, item number 5, please. I marked the wrong one.
Okay. Item 5 is a resolution declaring the necessity for the city to proceed with the proposed CDBG fiscal year 2018 demolition project number 1, and directing the city manager to advertise for and receive bids in relation thereto, and declaring that this resolution shall take immediate effect in accordance with section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Lloyd?
I move for the adoption of this resolution under the suspension of the rules and in full accordance with section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Then a motion and second. Discussion. Mrs. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Now on the resolution?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
That resolution is adopted. Item number 6, please.
Item number 6A is an ordinance approving the emergency work at the chemical building at the Big Island Waterworks plant, ratifying the emergency services performed, and authorizing further services to be performed by Adena Corporation of Mansfield, Ohio, relating to the sodium hypochlorite tanks in the amount of $61,579, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Waddington.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance A under suspension of the rules in full accordance with section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
And a motion and second. Discussion. Mr. Klein, I know you talked to us about this. Was either Mr. Klein or Mr. Wobser, I've forgotten, highlighted the need for this work a couple of weeks ago. I don't remember now, but could you go over it again, please, and why this is so important?
Yes, sir. Through you, Mr. President, this, at our water plant, it was actually last September that we brought this to the commission through the manager's report. It was the week right before the commission meeting that we found out that there was a bulge in one of the outside of the fiberglass tanks that we had at the water treatment plant. The chemical in that was the sodium hypochlorite tank that luckily there was a bladder inside that held firm. So what we were able to do was we were able to put some bands around the outside and secure the plastic in place. Unfortunately, it takes 12 weeks or so to get new tanks in. So we've been bleeding. We bled that tank back into the system, into the process over the next several weeks. That tank has not been operational. We've used the other tank, which actually in the capital plan, we had planned on including that tank as a replacement. So when we got into it, the tank that was closer to the new wall that we had to blow a door into, we decided it was in the best interest to install both tanks since they were both in repair or in need of replacement. So Ordinance A is for the that's for the actual construction work that was done to put the the door in the side of the wall, moved some piping around, and now it's going to be also for installing the new tanks when they show up. And Ordinance B is actually for the new tanks, the 2 new tanks that are going to be installed. So luckily, we've been very fortunate that we haven't had any major catastrophe since then. We've been monitoring it, obviously, on a daily basis, and we expect those tanks to be in. We just got notice today that the tanks should be in next week, and then they can get them installed within a week after that. So everything's moving slower than we like, but we have no control over those tanks.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. Questions or comments, commissioners?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Brady.
Mr. Klein, it appears that you've almost got us 2 tanks for the price of 1. I see that we had originally estimated $100,000 for 1 tank, and we in essence have replaced the entire system, both tanks now, for about 25% more money.
Through Mr. President, actually, I don't want to take credit. That was Orrin McMonigal, the superintendent. He went out and he looked at several different manufacturers, several different materials, and he found actually a material that was more compatible with the chemical, and it was more cost effective for us. So he did a lot of research and making sure that we got the best bang for the buck on this one.
Our thanks to him.
Additional questions or comments on Ordinance 6A? Mrs. Cressy, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
And on the ordinance?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. Mrs. Cressy, would you present item 6B, please?
Yes, 6B is an ordinance ratifying the emergency purchase of 2 fiberglass bulk tanks for the chemical building at the Big Island Waterworks plant, and authorizing and directing the city manager and/or finance director to expend funds to Harrington Industrial Plastics LLC of Chino, California, in the amount of $65,740, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Twine.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance 6B under the suspension of the rules in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion. Mrs. Cressy, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
That ordinance is adopted. Our last regular item, please, Mrs. Cressy, number 7.
Yes, number 7 is an ordinance authorizing and directing the city manager to enter into a contract with Republic Services of Sandusky, Ohio for refuse recycling collection on city property for the period of March 1, 2019 through February 28, 2021, and declaring that this ordinance shall take immediate effect in accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Commissioners, having heard this communication, how do you wish to proceed?
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Lloyd.
I move for the adoption of this ordinance under the suspension of the rules and in full accordance with Section 14 of the city charter.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion. I don't know who's going to present this on behalf of staff. Ms. Klein, is that you? I know there's been a little bit of background. Just let me set the table a little bit. This is about a 20% increase in cost, and this is the trash hauling for just the city properties, or the dumpsters that we have at the various buildings that we have in town, and downtown trash and things of that nature. But maybe you could provide a little bit of the background in terms of an anticipated price reduction, and then I think the commission would like to have a larger discussion about this.
Yes, sir. Certainly, Mr. President. When we received the bids for this contract, we only received one. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of market for a contract of this size in the region. Maybe a contract of larger size would be more appealing, but at this time, we only got one bid. That was for Republic Services, and that's effective March 1st of 2019, so it's something that we need to get in place right away. When we saw that they came in about $11,000 higher than last year, the price went from about $48,500 to $59,500. we contacted them and asked them why such a big increase, and they said, well, because you added 37 new trash containers. And we told them that we did not, that we actually only added one, and that was at the Cleveland Road Park that was installed last year. The bidder had realized that he erroneously put a bid together based on the 2020 numbers, the second year, year 2 of the contract. And that had new trash containers for Shoreline Drive and Jackson Street Pier. There were more on those than what we currently have. So when he went back and reanalyzed his bid, he dropped almost $9,000 off of his price and said that we could save $8,703.34. However, since this was a bid and this wasn't something that we were able to just receive costs and enter into a purchase order, the way that, in talking to the law director, the way that we would like to proceed, and I do have in writing from Republic that they are going to give us that reduction, the way that we would like to proceed would, instead of rebidding it, is to award this contract and then within a month come back with that revised cost and a change order to reduce the price of year 1 of the contract. So the cost for year 2 is accurate. That does include the new trash receptacles. Now, since we don't know exactly the quantity that we're going to end up with on the pier and Shoreline Drive, they're aware that we may come back and adjust the cost again. But for now, year 1, we would be coming back and reducing that to $50,753.03.
Thank you, Mr. Klein. Commissioners, questions or comments? I, for one, if this is not a sufficient size contract that we couldn't find anybody else who was interested in bidding on it, I think that we ought to take a look at providing the service ourselves. And I would like to ask Mr. Wubser, Mr. Klein, however you think it's appropriate to go about finding that out. I'd like to understand what the cost would be to buy a truck, hire the employees to do this ourselves. I would have to think that that is something that we could bring in below that cost, obviously over the couple of years, because those trucks are not inexpensive. But I would feel better that we had looked at those options and had some protection against the fact that maybe this just really isn't a size of contract that's interesting to enough of the trash haulers in the area.
Through the commission president, to the commission, we can certainly cost that out. I know we've looked at options. Obviously, our recommendation would be to proceed with this tonight, but with the outs to, at an appropriate time, whether it was at the end of this contract or with the clauses in this that would allow us to go into a different direction, to consider that at that time. But I know we're looking at a variety of different options as to how to keep these costs under control. I don't know if you want to add to that at all, Aaron.
Lockhart.
I think I agree with you. Perhaps we should explore those options, looking at doing it in-house or otherwise, but I think I like in-house first to reduce the cost over terms. If it's such a significant outlay, it certainly takes sparing a look at it. So I agree if we can hold off or however you think you want to do it, but I agree.
Well, I think we do need to enter into this contract, otherwise the trash containers are going to be overfilled this weekend. But understanding that we'll have that reduction that will come through, and I'm just asking for investigation. Give us some numbers and tell us what your thoughts are.
But how long are we bound to this agreement?
This agreement has, well, it's ostensibly 2 years, but I did check with Mr. Hayberger. As many of our contracts do, there is a provision that if we feel that we need to terminate the contract for our convenience, we can do so with 30 days' notice. Mr. Hayberger, would you confirm that?
Yes,
Have that
correct.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
Additional questions or comments?
Chairman, I'm not opposed if the staff has time to look it up, but at $50,000 a year, isn't that like one salary for one guy?
I don't know that it takes more than one person to operate the truck, though.
Okay, they'll get back to us, but that's fine. Fine, I'll vote yes. That's good.
Additional questions or comments? Mr. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
And now on the ordinance?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
That ordinance is adopted. And that completes our regular items. Mr. Webster, the floor is yours for your city manager's report.
Thank you, Commission President, Commissioners, audience, and staff. Starting with donations. First, we have a donation of $2,000 that was received from the Elks for the Century Pod cameras. If I could ask for a motion to approve that donation.
So move.
Second.
It's been a motion and second discussion. Without objection, the motion be approved. And hearing no objection, the motion is approved with our thanks for that very generous donation from the Elks.
Moving on to the Police Department, Sergeant Tracy Susanna will not only be representing the Sandusky Police Department, the city of Sandusky, but also the state of Ohio on her trek to Abu Dhabi, the United Arab Emirates. She was actually on the front page of today's paper, if you saw that for this. She's going to be representing the Ohio Law Enforcement Torch Run. 100 officers from 24 different countries will be participating in the torch run, culminating with the beginning of the 2019 Special Olympic World Games. Sergeant Susanna will be running in all 7 of the United Arab Emirates over the course of a week with the Flame of Hope. So we wish her the best of luck and are very proud of her in those efforts. Also, the 2019 Special Olympics World Summer Games is a multi-sport event for athletes with intellectual disabilities. In the tradition of the Special Olympics movement, it's going to be held in Abu Dhabi from March 2014 through the 21st of this year. And we want to wish her well and thank her for her tireless work in promoting the Special Olympics and the athletes. Also, the members of the department were recertified on basic life support, CPR, AEDs on February 12th and 14th. A big thanks to Firelands Regional Medical Center South Campus Education Program for hosting the department and providing the training. Moving on to the fire department, I want to congratulate Bill Reyes on his retirement from Sandusky Fire and thank him for his 28 years of service. Also to congratulate Kevin McGraw, who will be promoted to lieutenant on April 17th. And to welcome new hire Stephen Matt, who started on February 21st. Stephen is a firefighter and paramedic. Also, the fire department has been assisting with food delivery from the Salvation Army to the Midtown Supper Club. And Sandusky Fire has also been continuing to help OGO twice a month. A thank you to Community Impact Officer Jeff Danovich for spearheading that worthy cause. Moving on to finance, the next scheduled finance committee meeting is Friday, March 22nd, 2019 at 8 a.m. For Public Works, ODOT is finalizing plans to resurface State Route 6 between the East Corporation Limit and Tiffin Avenue as part of their urban paving program in 2020. A portion of this project must be paid for by the city as local match, and an agreement will be coming soon for approval. The city has been awarded $759,427 of federal funds through the MPO and ODOT for reconstruction of East Monroe between Meigs and Decatur. This project is expected in 2023. Staff is planning to repair the eastbound tire lane between Warren and Meigs later this year. Also, just to thank you for the continued partnership with Erie County and Perkins Township. We are working with them to engage a consultant to complete a cost-benefit analysis that will result in a recommendation regarding long-term refuse and recycling collection within Sandusky and Perkins Township. Staff expects to bring back a recommendation to the commission sometime in March. Also, Big Island Waterworks continues to participate in ongoing research led by Kent State and funded by the Ohio Sea Grant and National Science Foundation. While Sandusky's water service regularly exceeds standards, the water samples provided allow researchers to evaluate existing pollutants in source water as well as how treatment technologies reduce those pollutants when making drinking water. And finally, for Public Works, staff has been working diligently with ODNR for a year to design shoreline stabilization for Lions Park. During this time, field crews have been working on frozen ground at Mills Creek Golf Course to separate large riprap that has been stockpiled there for many years. Once existing materials are categorized, staff hopes to bid a project this spring. A temporary shore structure permit application has already been submitted to ODNR. Moving on to Department of Community Development. Peter and Joan Neff are requesting the satisfaction of mortgage for their 2007 CDBG exterior rehabilitation loan in the amount of $6,000. Mr. and Mrs. Neff are unable to afford the cost of their home located at 3328 West Monroe. In December, the Neffs requested a satisfaction of their loan in order for a short sale to take place in their property. However, the short sale recently fell through. With the short sale no longer occurring, Mr. and Mrs. Neff would like to provide their deed in lieu of foreclosure to the mortgage company. The mortgage company has agreed to accept the deed in lieu of foreclosure as long as the city's lien is satisfied. City staff is recommending approval of the satisfaction order to keep the property from being foreclosed upon. However, staff is recommending the satisfaction occurs simultaneously with the insurance of a maintenance bond to the city from the mortgage company. With that, I'd like to ask for a motion to approve.
So moved.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just a question. I'm not up on real estate. What's the upside of this dealing? What's the difference between the two?
Well, a short sale would be where the bank agrees to accept and, I guess, bless a sale to someone for less than the full amount of the mortgage. So if you owed $50,000 on a home and the property sold for $40,000, that would be a short sale, and the bank would have to consent to that because as part of that, they would be discharging or giving up their lien. And the difference between this is that this is simply going back to the bank, so it's, instead of selling it to a third party, it's a deed in lieu of foreclosure. So the bank just gets the deed, and then they'll have to deal with selling it.
Okay, what was the original $6,000? What was owed? When was it taken out, and how much was paid on it? The $6,000 is left that the taxpayers are giving to the bank.
So, Mr. President, to Commissioner Poole, so these typical loans were sort of a 50-50 match. So the $6,000 is due upon sale of the property, which is 50% of what the original loan is. To add some additional detail, when this was approved in December, staff recommended it because we liked the idea of the property getting occupied immediately via short sale. This, unfortunately, will leave the property partially unoccupied for some period of time, but by doing a deed in lieu of foreclosure, it will increase the period upon which that property is resold and occupied and stave off what could be a 12 to 18-month vacancy in foreclosure. Understanding, though, it's going back to a bank, we want to make sure that there's a property maintenance bond in place in the event the city would ever have to step in and maintain the property, whether that be grass, securing the property, et cetera. So again, this isn't the preferred outcome, which was approved in December, but we want to find sort of that secondary approach to limit the amount of vacancy of the property and have a backstop of the maintenance bond in place should anything happen to the property.
To be clear, Mr. Lasko, this is not the city pressing this issue. This is the property owners and the bank that have come to this point.
Yes, Mr. President, we never proactively will bring these to commission. These are always driven by, in this instance, a short sale or other types of real estate transactions in which our lien needs to be satisfied in full or in part.
I'm very sorry for the Neffs. Additional questions or comments on the motion that's pending? Mr. Cresser, would you, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Mr. Wobser, back to you.
Thank you. Moving on to the Planning Department, the regular Planning Commission meeting is Wednesday, February 27th at 4:30 PM in the conference room. The regular Board of Zoning Appeals meeting will be scheduled on Thursday, March 21st at 4:30 PM, also in the first floor conference room. And the Landmark Commission meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, March 20th, also at 4:30 PM in the first floor conference room. Moving on to recreation, the Sandusky Rec Department is excited to announce we'll be offering online registration for programs, camps, and events starting on March 1st. With coordination from IT and finance, Rec Desk software will be part of the city's new website and allow residents the ability to set up their own user accounts for their families and more easily log into programming. The software will also make park, shelter, and gazebo reservations more streamlined as we enter into the spring season. Prior to this upgrade, participants would have to mail or visit the recreation offices to sign up for programs, camps, and events. Rec Desk will make it possible for participants to sign up from their smartphones and allow our recreation staff to provide direct links to recreation programming from the city's new website and our social media sites. And I know staff's been working on this for a while and is really excited about that update, as are the consumers of recreation, which is doing more programming than ever. Also, Sandusky Rec is partnering with Firelands Regional Medical Center and several local walking and running events to provide the Run Dusky 2019 race series in the city this year. 7 races within the city's limits are part of the series, including the Humane Society 5K, Running Laps with Lions, All for Abs 5K. I should probably do that one. The Boy with the Boot 5K, 10K, and Family Relay, the Blue Streak Pride 5K, Save Your Pumpkins 5K, and the Dot the I, Block the M Walk Run. Anyone who registers and participates in 5 of the 7 events, fills out a Run Dusky card and has it stamped, will receive a Run Dusky hoodie. Participants at 6 or 7 of the events will be entered into a drawing for a running package including registration to area running events. There is no charge for participating in the Sandusky Race Series, but each race has individual registration fees. The series is set up to promote walking, running, and outdoor exercise in 2019. Anyone interested in participating in the series can contact Jason Whirling at jwhirling, JWERLING, at ci.sandusky.oh.us or call 419-627-5833. That concludes my remarks for this evening. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Webster. Commissioners, questions or comments for the city manager?
Mr. Chairman,
Brady.
I'd like to back up for a moment in your comments, Mr. Webster, to acknowledge the leadership that was provided by Erie County Commissioner Matt Old in securing the funding for this cost-benefit analysis on the refuse and recycling issue that we're entering into, and acknowledge the fact that this is an opportunity for us. Perkins Township is asked to partner with us at looking at these costs and looking at a couple of ideas that we're pursuing on both curbside recycling and just exactly how we can handle both curbside recycling and refuse, and if that can be done effectively. No one certainly can predict the future, but I think the future perhaps starts with this cost analysis, and the wonderful thing is the county is picking up the cost of this with Commissioner Olt's leadership on that.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Additional questions or comments for the city manager? Then we will turn to old business. Anyone having any items of old business?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Waddington.
just a follow-up on the NASA intake. Have we heard any more staff or as far as what's going on out there?
Last I had spoken with Mr. Shenigo about 10 days ago. They were about to do just a flow test to see, the capacity of the existing pumps and pipes to go from the Big Island Waterworks, from the, from Sheldon's intake to NASA, just to see what, I have not heard the results of that testing. I don't know. That's all I know. Additional items of old business. Any items of new business? I do need to ask to reset. I need to ask for a motion to reset the public hearing for the 2019 budget. It was going to be today, but we're not quite ready. And staff has asked that we reset it to March 11. And so if someone would care to make that motion, I'd appreciate it.
So moved.
Second.
It's been a motion and second. Discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That motion is set for March 11.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Brady.
I'd like to make a motion to set an executive session regarding acquisition of real estate.
Second.
Been a motion and second. Discussion. Ms. Cresser, would you poll the commissioners on the motion, please?
Mr. Waddington?
Yes.
Ms. Twine?
Yes.
Mr. Lockhart?
Yes.
Mr. Murray?
Yes.
Ms. Lloyd?
Yes.
Mr. Poole?
Yes.
Mr. Brady?
That executive session is set. Any other items of new business? And I'm going to open it up now to audience participation. Anyone wishing to address the commission on the item of city business, please step to the microphone, give us your name, address, and your thoughts, please.
Sharon Johnson, 1139 Fifth Street. I'm not clear on this grant thing and this nonprofit. Is the commission allowing $50,000 to go into his nonprofit, the developer's nonprofit?
So what Mr. Wobser had indicated before, Ms. Cresser, Ms. Johnson, is that the specific language of the grant, which was in front of us and was published, provides that it's a $150,000 grant upon the completion of construction, another $350,000 upon the receipt of a certificate of occupancy. So those are grants made to the developer or the owner after those monies have been invested. What that owner does with the money is immaterial to the city. What we want to do is we want to see it built. How he uses that money, whether he uses it to repay a loan that he made to himself, or if he uses it for any other purpose, that's not something that we control. Because at that point, the property will have been constructed and completed and occupied, which is what our objective is and the reason for the grant. So we don't know anything about, I don't certainly know anything about a nonprofit, but he would be certainly free to take that money and put it in a nonprofit if that's how he chose to spend the money.
Oh, that's terrible.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Poole.
Yeah, may I suggest that this is what we need to do to get downtown built up and get these buildings taken care of. We're not in, this is necessary in terms of our contribution. What we're doing downtown and around this entire city is we are, you call it partnering, but essentially we are investing as investors in things that we think are going to provide fruit down the road for the community. Sometimes, you know, and everyone has their opinion about, in any investment, about how much you should invest and what it's worth. In this case, as Mr. Murray said earlier, getting these buildings taken care of is necessary, and I voted for this because I don't see a better option. And for the amount of money that is being invested by the developer is significant enough that it's worth the risk, us putting this money into it. Like presidential tweets, this is a Facebook problem. That's why you're here, because someone decided to say something that could be interpreted many ways on Facebook. And we're gonna make a whole bunch of, there's gonna be people that are gonna never be satisfied with this. I'm hoping that at the end of the day, that the end result for the community is positive enough that folks will go, okay, they made a good judgment. But I'm the first to say, yes, we're spending a lot of taxpayers' money, but some of it I agree totally with, some of it I just came to the conclusion that there's not a better deal out there, and it's worth it because we're not better off if we don't do this.
That's not good enough for this taxpayer.
Well, I realize you're not gonna be satisfied, and there are gonna be others that are not.
That guy can do whatever he wants with $500,000.
They all, any amount of money, that's the way it is when you give grants. But we have stipulated that we will get this building rebuilt, as we've said. Now, what he said he did with the money out of his pocket, whether it was right pocket or our money in the left pocket, is not something that we're gonna argue about. I'm sorry that it.
That's disgraceful.
Because.
That's embarrassing.
That's the problem.
So let me address further the concern that has been raised, and that is that ordinarily with a grant, the reason that there are a lot of safeguards put in place is that we want to make sure that the money is used to secure the objectives that we are making the grant for. This is an instance in which we have absolute protection because the grant won't be made until the objective which we have designated, that we seek, has been completed and paid for. So it's not one of these things where the grant money is doled out over a period of time as certain landmarks are accomplished. We get the whole thing completed before we put any money into it. So that's the difference in this instance, in my judgment. Anyone else wishing to address the commission? If not, then we will take a brief recess and return for an executive session.
Mr. Chairman, Byrne,
Yes.
I'd like to welcome Gabrielle Reeder here. She is a junior at Edison High School, and she's taking a government class, so she came to check out our system.
Good, well, welcome. With that, we'll take a brief recess. Thank you.